Okay, live stream on. Are we good to go, King?
All right. Is it playing?
Oh, hold on 1 sec.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. It is I, your king, King Clifford Jefferson. I say the Godfrey, the fifth caliban Jew, son of folk, the ruler of Jerusalem. It is me and my archbishop beside me here with another marvelous lecture to bring to the people about who they are as Anglo-Saxon Berbers. I'll let my archbishop say a couple of words and then we can get on with this marvelous lesson. I digress.
Greetings, everyone, within the Kingdom of England, Empire of Albion. It is I, Archbishop Belmont, from the illustrious noble house of Belmont. And then once again, it is the Third Temple English Church of England, headed by our King, Clifford Jefferson, from the Royal House of Plantagenet, as well as our Queen, Godwinson, from the House of Godwinson. And we'd like to go ahead and extend a thank you and a welcome to those of you who have the ability to hear our voice when it comes down to hearing the truth that has been shrouded in mystery for far so long. And today is January 13th, 2024, the Gregorian calendar, which is equivalent to the January 13th, 2973, headed to the 2974 Berber calendar. Because those of you who have been following us know that tomorrow, which is January 14th, is not only the Berber New Year, but also our King Clifford Jefferson's his birthday or solar return. So the ancestors are definitely tailoring this lesson for a beautiful new year for those of you who have the ability to once again hear this the divine truth and wisdom that we have been able to be tailored through the cosmos via autobiological memory within our DNA to bring it to those of you who shall receive the inheritance on earth, which we like to call the Kingdom of England. And I'd like to go ahead and digress so therefore we can go ahead and get started with this marvelous lesson. Peace.
Well said, Archbishop. Can we keep that on routine or do we have to silence that? I like how that sounded.
Oh, well, we can play it for now. So,
Okay, all right. So welcome again, all those here at the Third Temple English Church. Once again, this is I, your king, from the illustrious house of Jefferson, i.e. Godfrey, descended down from Godfrey the fifth caliban Jew, the son of folk, the ruler of Jerusalem. Have you here for about an hour, hour and a half, hopefully half an hour. Another marvelous uh, interpretation about how Frederick Douglass, who was a slave in Maryland, even though amongst the turmoil and the uh, condition that him and his family or kinfolk were subject to, he took the time to in depth into the knowledge of who his paternal father is, going back to the concept of what we call time immemorial, time out of mind. And that was Anglo-Saxon. We're going to have a small debate, me and Archbishop Belmont from the House of Belmont, on this topic. We promise not to hold you long, but it's definitely going to be heavy for you. So hold on to your seats, get your popcorn and your soda, because, hey, we're about to bring it to you. Without further ado, let's get started. And we're going to start with the Dred Scott case. Okay? We're going to start with the Dred Scott case because we know that from the records we're going to show you today, Frederick Douglass had a problem with the Dred Scott case and Chief Judge Taney about the status of the so-called Negro. All right, so let's get started. Archbishop.
okay. Okay.
You can start from here.
So it says, no case in England appears to have been more thoroughly examined than that of Somerset. The judgment pronounced by Lord Mansfield was the judgment of the Court of King's Bench. The cause was argued at the great length and with great ability. by Hargrave and others, who stood among the most eminent counsel in England. It was held under advisement from term to term, and a due sense of its importance was felt and expressed by the bench. In giving the opinion of the court, Lord Mansfield said, "The state of slavery is such of a nature that it is incapable of being introduced on any reasons, moral or political, but only by positive law, which preserves its force long after the reasons, occasion, and time itself from whence it was created, is erased from the memory. It is of a nature that nothing can be suffered to support it but positive law."
Okay. So as he said, nothing could be more productive to what they call slavery than positive law, which is unproductive to the slave. So we want to show you that what positive law is what they call your present day, modern day statutes that was created through those who created these statutes and concerning those who will be the slave masters as confirmed by the Naturalization Act of 1790, which we'll go to right now. Read the first paragraph, Archbishop.
The Naturalization Act of 1790 was a law of the United States Congress to set the first uniform rules for the granting of the United States citizenship by naturalization. The law limited naturalization to free white persons of good character, thus excluding Native Americans, indentured servants, enslaved people, free Africans, Pacific Islanders, and non-white Asians. This eliminated ambiguity on how to treat newcomers, given that free black people had been allowed citizenship at the state level in many states. In reading the Naturalization Act, the courts also associated whiteness with Christianity, and thus excluded Muslim immigrants from citizenship until the decision Ex parte Moriles recognized citizenship for a Saudi Muslim man in 1944.
Okay. So we see that the Naturalization Act was in regards to citizen and associating with those who will be classified as what they call free white person. It has nothing to do with genealogy, ethnicity, origin to some type of nationality. All right. To them, it's called naturalization. And as we can see here, it's in the form of what we call statutory legislation. So let's just get an idea of what statutory legislation is and what they identify it as. Ethnicity, origin to some type of nationality. All right. To them, it's called naturalization. Read this part right here, Archbishop. Form of what we call statutory legislation. So let's just get an idea of what statutory legislation is and what they identify it as. The Archbishop. It says the portion of the public law enacted as amendments to the United States Code. Once enacted into law, an act will be published to the statute at large and will add to modify or delete some part of the United States Code. Provisions of the public law that contains only enacted clauses affect the dates in similar matters and are generally codified. Private laws are not generally codified. Some portions of the United States codes have been enacted as what they say here, Archbishop,
Enacted as positive law.
and other portions have not been so enacted. In case of the conflict between the text of the statute at large and the text of provisions of the United States Code that is not being enacted as positive law, that text of the statute at large takes precedence. So as we can see here, based off the codification under the United States Code, there's a difference between statutory law and positive law. And as we go back to the Dred Scott case, referring to the Naturalization Act deals with those who are not nationals. All right. You don't have a nationality. If you're naturalized, that means that you're allowed to come there, which is a form of what we call migration. All right. Allowed to migrate there. Just in the case of what we call colonies or the colonists were allowed to immigrate or migrate under the Settlement Act of 1701, which we talk about in a second. All right. Let's go here back to the Dred Scott case.
So it says,
536.
so it says the position that slavery can only exist except under the authority of law. It is objected that in few, if any, instances has it been established by statutory enactment. This is no answer to the doctrine laid down by the court. Almost all the principles of the common law have their foundation in usage. Slavery was introduced into the colonies of this country by Great Britain at an early period of their history, and it was protected and cherished until it became incorporated into the colonial policy. It is immaterial whether a system of slavery was introduced by express law or otherwise, if it have the authority of law. There is no slave state where the institution is not recognized and protected by statutory enactments and judicial decisions. Slaves are made property by the laws of the slave states, and as such are liable to the claims of creditors. They descend to their heirs, are taxed, and in the South they are subject to commerce.
Okay. So it says that slavery was created by Great Britain and brought in and incorporated to the colonies. All right. And it was regulated by legislation. Let's see what legislation they're talking about. Right here. 539.
It says slavery is emphatically a state institution. In the ninth section of the first article of the Constitution, it is provided that the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. In the convention,
That right there. So as we can see, naturalization is a result of allowing migration to a particular territory by way of some charter, some grant, some authority that was granted by somebody who allowed somebody to come on land that's apparently owned by an overlord. All right. And we see here it said that under the ninth section of the first article of the Constitution, it allowed for the migration. So in the term of migration, that's synonymous with slavery. All right. You agree, Archbishop?
I agree.
Okay, let's move forward. The next one.
It says, in the convention, it was proposed by a committee of 11 to limit the importation of slaves to the year 1800, when Mr. Pinckney moved to extend the time to the year 1808. This motion was carried. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, voting in the affirmative, and New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia in the negative. In opposition to the motion, Mr. Madison said, 20 years will produce all the mischief that can be apprehended from the liberty to import slaves. So long a term will be more dishonorable to the American character than to say nothing about it in the Constitution.
Okay, so it says that New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia was opposed to that of Massachusetts, Hampshire, Connecticut, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, because these were all Confederate states, i.e. slave states, even though Frederick Douglass was enslaved in Maryland. Okay, he was trying to escape the clause of Maryland. We know that he had to get to a place where territory was not practicing. All right, let's read 541. Read this one.
It says, the provision in regard to the slave trade shows clearly that Congress considers slavery a state institution to be continued and regulated by its individual sovereignty, and to conciliate that interest, the slave trade was continued 20 years, not as a general measure, but for the benefit of such states as shall think proper to encourage it.
Okay, so as we can see, based off the Dred Scott, As confirmed by Chief Justice Cheney, slavery was authorized by Section 9 or Article 1 of the Constitution at the time of the Articles of Confederation, because it also said that slavery was instituted by Great Britain and it was incorporated into the colonies. Didn't it say that, Archbishop?
It sure did.
This is the Dred Scott case, y'all, and it's talking about it was emphatically a part of the state's slave trade, and that in order for this to come to fruition, they had to create laws in regards to the regulation of slaves, and just in case the slave ran away from his slave master or his bondsman, such as the case as Frederick Douglass. All right, but he made it a freedom, y'all. What you gonna do about it? Are you gonna make it a freedom? All right, because you're still enslaved. Frederick Douglass is going to show you that in this present day, you are all slaves. All right, they took it off the chains, and then they incorporated in legislation by 69 Article 1 of the Constitution, and then they regulated by way of what they call Bill of Attainder. Every time you get pulled over, what happens? Driver license, registration, etc. One of our members pulled over the other day and told them that I'm on Crown land and this is Crown property. You can't touch me. And guess what the officer said? Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Why? Because they know this is Crown land. Let's confirm it. Right here, Archbishop.
Says, many of the states on the adoption of the Constitution, or shortly afterward, took measures to abolish slavery within their respective jurisdictions. And it is a well-known fact that a belief was cherished by the leading men, South as well as North, that the institution of slavery would gradually decline until it would become extinct. The increased value of slave labor in the culture of cotton and sugar prevented the realization of this expectation. Like all other communities and states, the South were influenced by what they considered to be their own interests. But if we are to turn our attention to the dark ages of the world, why confine our view to colored slavery? On the same principles, white men were made slaves. All slavery has its origin in power, and it is against right.
Okay. Everybody, please don't lose focus with what Archbishop just said in regards to the origin of slavery going back to the dark ages of the world, which is what we call time immemorial. We know not of. Frederick Douglass didn't know about that until he researched it and realized that he was no slave. It was them who was enslaved, and they are doing to us as a result of us lacking in our understanding on the purpose of keeping them enslaved as a result of their actions. All right. If one is freed, then the action of freedom is to stay free. All right, and don't conduct yourself contrary to that of freedom. All right, for yourself or anyone else. If you do it contrary to your freedom and enslave somebody else, then you deserve to be enslaved because it's contrary to freedom.
All right. The law of cause and effect.
You want to say something on that, Archbishop?
Yes, that's what we call the laws of cause and effect, or the law of karma, or the law of, the golden rule: do unto others as you want others do unto you. You know, and so like the king said, what we did to them, they did to us. And all the kingdoms did practice some form of bondage, even though it may not have been on the record. And England was the only one that never actually institutionalized it legislatively, even though we had foreigners who were practicing it via a commercial purpose. And that's the reason why we're bringing this information to the light, to let you know that it was not supposed to be done, because it goes against the proper laws of nature. So as now as you see, those different foreigners or invaders who came in, they all was underneath this ideology of bond, or put those in bondage who they come to enslave.
Well said, Archbishop. And we'll prove it right here. Read this section.
It is a settled doctrine of this court that the federal government can exercise no power over the subject of slavery within the states, nor control the intermigration of slaves, other than fugitives, among the states. Nor can that government affect the duration of slavery within the states, other than by a legislation over the foreign slave trade. The power of Congress to adopt a section of the act above cited must therefore depend upon some conditions of the territories which distinguish them from the states, and subjects them to a control more extended. The third section of the fourth article of the Constitution is referred to as the only and all sufficient grant to support this claim. It
Now,
is
okay. So as we can see, Article Section 9 or Article 1 of the Constitution created legislation for slavery to exist by way of those laws that allow slavery to be incorporated by way of it being going back to the origin of Great Britain. We know Great Britain was in 1707 with the unification of Scotland and Ireland with the Parliament of England under the King of England as ruling as de facto rulers because they are not members of the royal family of English royal prerogatives, according to their royal prerogatives of English monarchs. There was on the agenda of Scottish monarchs who enslaved you. All right.
exactly.
This we're reading the Dred Scott case, y'all, for God's sake. All right.
Mhm.
Scott is a surname. All right. So as we can see, the only way they can regulate the legislation slavery under Section 9 Article 1, they had to create the executive branch, right? To put those officials in that office as you see today, right? You see busloads of migrants coming in today, intermigration to every state, all right, by these same slaveholders, right? And then when there's a problem with that, who upholds it? The judicial branch, because that's the third part of the Constitution. One is the legislative, two is the executive, three is the judicial. So now, being that under these laws passed by the executive branch and backed by the judicial branch, now they can allow slaves to come and do what they call naturalization,
Immigration.
they call migration or intermigration, right? Which has nothing to do with the black people because black people under that misnomer were excluded from that Naturalization Act under those positive laws because Somerset versus Stewart says that when a person misnominated as black stepping to England, he's free. Why? Because in reality, they really know this brother has English descent. How we gonna know it? Frederick Douglass is gonna qualify. All right, and it's all about what? Land.
Man, yep.
It's all about land. Why? Let's prove it before we move forward. I only know I'm on a short time, so I gotta move quick. Read this real quick.
But the recognition of a plenary power in Congress to dispose of the public domain or to organize a government over it does not imply a corresponding authority to determine the internal polity or to adjust the domestic relations or the persons who may lawfully inhabit the territory in which it is situated. A supreme power to make needful rules respecting the public domain and a similar power framing laws to operate upon persons and things within the territorial limits where it lies are distinguished by broad lines of demarcation in American history. This court has assisted us to define them in Johnson versus McIntosh.
Ah, okay. Johnson versus McIntosh is a public trust doctrine. All right. Also, Martin versus Waddell is synonymous with deal with the public trust doctrine governing New Jersey. And guess who's the judge on that case? Chief Justice
Chief
Taney.
Justice Taney.
Chief Justice Taney, right? And he is aware of the respected territory that the United States, under the Articles of Confederation, must respect, right? They must respect the territory that resides under the crown, and any slave steps on crown property is free. All right.
Mhm.
If you're in these Confederate states as a result of secession, which is territory ceded to the United States by way of what they call federal land, which resulted by the treaties made with other monarchs, going back to the Treaty of Paris of 1763, the Treaty of Paris of 1787, and I'm parts of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, as well as the Treaty of Paris of 1783. All the territory that was France and Spain had that was ceded to Great Britain was now surrendered back to the United States by way of secession. And those who actually had a right to that land, who were the heirs, have been the ones enslaved. And Frederick Douglass is going to tell you. All right, let's read this and move forward to that proof.
All right, it says, according to the theory of the British Constitution, all vacant lands are vested in the Crown, and the exclusive power to grant them is admitted to reside in the Crown as a branch of the royal prerogative. All the lands were originally granted by the Crown, and the establishment of a royal government has never been considered as impairing its right to grant lands within the chartered limits of such colony. And the British Parliament did claim supremacy of legislation coextensive within the absoluteness of the dominion of the sovereign over the Crown lands. The American doctrine, to the contrary, is embodied in the two brief resolutions of the people of Pennsylvania in 1774. First, that the inhabitants of these colonies are entitled to the same rights and liberties within the colonies that the subjects born in England are entitled within the realm. Second,
Ah, okay. So we know that Dred Scott case, which is the case we're reading, said that slavery was brought to the colonies by Great Britain and incorporated in the colonies, and the colonies want the same rights that the English subjects have in this realm. So who are these people in this realm that have the rights to those in England? All right. Who are these people? If it ain't the colonists, but the colonists want these rights.
mm-hmm.
It must be us. It has to be us. All right. The proof is there, right? Because we were on the land longer than them. All right. Let's read on. Let's come to our closing in this one.
I said second, that the power assumed by Parliament to bind the people of these colonies by statutes, in all cases whatever, is unconstitutional, and therefore the source of these unhappy difficulties. The Congress of 1774, in their statement of rights and grievances, affirm a free and exclusive power of legislation in their several provincial legislators, in all cases of taxation and internal polity, subject only to the negative of their sovereign, in such manner as have been heretofore used and accustomed. The unanimous consent of the people of the colonies, then, to the power of their sovereign, to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory of the Crown, in 1774, was deemed by them as entirely consistent with opposition, remonstrance, the renunciation of allegiance, and proclamation of civil war, in preference to submission to his claim of supreme power in the territories. I pass now to the evidence afforded during the Revolution and Confederation. The American Revolution was not a social revolution. It did not alter the domestic condition or capacity of persons within the colonies, nor was it designed to disturb the domestic relations existing among them. It was a political revolution, by which 13 dependent colonies became 13 independent states. The Declaration of Independence was not, says Justice Chase, a declaration that the United Colonies jointly, in a collective capacity, were independent states, but that each of them was a sovereign and independent state. That is, that each of them had a right to govern itself by its own authority and its own laws, without any control from any other power on earth.
All right. So they have abandoned God. All right.
Mm-hmm.
That means you have abandoned God because God governs the earth.
Mm-hmm.
All right. If he created the earth, so you're saying hell with God, we're going to do our own thing. That's under prescription of sovereignty. You claim to be the sovereign when you ain't. And it ain't being contested by the sovereign. Because we know that the sovereign ain't no spook. The sovereign was
Exactly.
the Lord. All right. If you go to Isaiah 45, verse 4, it says that the Lord gave you a surname, but he know you not. All right. If you got a surname goes back to primogeniture, birthright, which you would go to case law, which we'll read in a second. In lieu of my short time that I have with you, brothers and sisters, is going to show you that the origin of surname goes back to the time of the Norman conquest. All right.
Mm-hmm.
In case law, let's read right quick. Read this next paragraph.
It says the sovereign and independent states, being united as a confederation, by various public acts of cession became jointly interested in territory, and concerned to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting it. It is a conclusion not open to discussion in this court that there was no territory within the original United States that was claimed by them in any other right than that of some of the Confederate States. The question whether the vacant lands within the United States, says Chief Justice Marshall, became joint property or belonged to the separate states was a momentous question which threatened to shake the American Confederacy to its foundations. This important and dangerous question has been compromised, and the compromise is not now to be contested.
Okay. So we have to understand how important what we're doing here at the Third Timothy English Church in regards to bringing to light what your ancestry and what your heritage is in regards to the missing information and the missing timeline that's been taken out of the equation. All right. This is what Frederick Douglass understood. All right. Let's hear it right out of his mouth. We're going to have three sources and we're going to move quick through that so we can really get to the meat because I know I'm on a short time frame.
We can
Right.
extend it a little bit longer, King. So take your time.
Oh, okay. All right. That's what I'm talking about. You see, I'm an Archbishop work with the king. All right. Let's get there, y'all. All right. So let's really hear from, we know that the province of Maryland Well, Nova Drive, where Frederick Douglass was enslaved, right? You see that?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Province of Baltimore was named after St. Mary City. All right. St. Mary City. I'm gonna just pretty much breeze through this right quick. All right. St. Mary City. All right. And this is the state or the colony, and at this time was a province of the crown, 1664, which was under the authority of what we call the Lords of Baltimore. All right. The Lords of Baltimore were people who ruled the territorial who were practicing slavery at the same time. All right. And we're going to show you because both of the people who were ruling, Cecil Calvert and uh, Calvin Calvert, were both slaveholders. All right. Let's check it out. Lord Baltimore II, let's pull him up. Cecil Calvert. You see that, Archbishop?
Yep, I can see. All right.
All right.
Said,
Everybody see that? This is Cecil Calvert. You see the brother right here. Everybody, please look at that. All right. Look at that. Now, these are the same slave traders that Frederick Douglass was trying to escape. He was a privileged slave, though, I might add. Once he had some good times and some bad times. He was beaten as a result of them allowing him to read under one of the slave masters. Her last name was All, Sophia All. Right, he was allowed to read because she was teaching her children the ABCs. Right, so Frederick Douglass had an opportunity to read, and as a result of that, the slave master who he was put under as an indentured servitude stopped him from reading, and every time he tried to, he beat him.
yep.
All right. So as we see, we have what we call Cecil Calvert. As we can see, a slave and indentured servant. Let's go to another Calvert. All right, and that goes back into the history of slavery. All right, we go into the history of slavery. There you have another Charles Calvert. Everybody see it. Charles Calvert, eldest son of Benedict Tom Swingate Calvert, painted by John Hilius in 1761, accompanied by a slave boy. All right, everybody see that. All right, so we can see that those who were at the ruling the plantations down in Maryland were straight slave traders. All right, straight slave traders. All right, which Frederick Douglass was trying to escape, which he did escape once he wrote his narrative on slavery. All right, he had to go to where? England.
Mm-hmm.
He had to go to England to escape slavery. All right, let's rebuild that. All right, I'm really about to blow your mind. First, let's do this real quick. Now, the reason why I'm coming here because I'm going to show you how important the Dred Scott was to us in this present day, as a result of how Frederick Douglass deemed the Dred Scott case in his day. All right, and his outlook on how Chief Justice Taney's decision was a wrong decision in regards to how he classified us misnominated as Negro Black, Color Ethiopian, because he knew he wasn't no citizen of the United States because they don't even include ethnicity or nationality or genealogy. We can prove that by coming here in Ray versus Hassan. Read this right quick, Archbishop.
It says, to summarize the approach we must be followed in deciding whether a particular person applying for citizenship is a white person within the meaning of the statute as interpreted by the Supreme Court. It is necessary to determine first the particular group or racial subdivision to which the individual belongs. In practical effect, proof of this fact is a matter of genealogy. Pay attention, everybody. Like they say, this is genealogy. So
Stop
you have
right
to
by here,
know.
Archbishop.
All right. An individual who presents an aberration, that means something different, from the color of skin of the group in which he is a member, such as a light skinned Chinese, or Japanese, or a dark-skinned Anglo-Saxon. So Paul, so hence they're telling you, or they're letting you know that there can be an aberration, i.e., something that's different from the norm that you are used to in regards to the complexion or the skin color of these individuals. And in this case, we're hinting or we're focusing on dark skinned Anglo Saxons because of those of you who are the true de jure Anglo Saxon people have not been privy to this information. So that's why we utilize Supreme Court cases to be able to cooperate with what it is that we're trying to explain to you because you're underneath the law. You're subject to the law. The history books only can work for so far, but it's the law itself that brings you your salvation, i.e., for you to find your freedom. So, in regards to this court case, as we're showing you, you have to show or prove your genealogy to tie you back to whoever you claim you descend from. And without having any proof of that, it's considered hearsay or a lack of evidence, which will tie you as being party as a ward of the state because you're considered what? Non-descendable. They don't know who you are. You don't have a clue who you are. So they giving you some type of benefit so that way you can have some type of existence out here. And your existence out here with the state, it's a slave. All right, so let's go ahead and continue.
All right. So, as Archbishop said, that even though you're classified by different characteristics, i.e., color of skin, that still does not denote to the first test, which is proving that you actually belong to this particular group of people.
Mm-hmm.
That's proven by genealogy, ethnicity, and that takes a nationality. The United States don't have nationality. Their concept of nationality is naturalization, which is migration. All right, you're an alien if you come to a land that's not your nation. That's an alien.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So each and every one of you watching this question, you need to ask yourself, am I a national or an alien? And a 9 times out of 10, you're pretty much an alien. All right. You're pretty much an alien. All right. That means that you're a slave because it just said in Dred Scott Cave emphatically that slavery was created by migration through Section 9 of Article 1, which is still in place to this present day. All right. Still in play in this present day, and it's getting pretty crowded over here, I might add.
Exactly.
It's getting crowded, y'all. Somebody gonna have to go. All right, and it ain't gonna be me, and it ain't gonna be Dred Scott, and it ain't gonna Dred Scott's another issue. It ain't gonna be Frederick Douglass because Frederick Douglass knew who he was. How we know? Let's get there.
All right. Oh, you want me to continue? I didn't finish reading the rest of the case.
Oh, okay, my bad. Go ahead.
All right, so it says, so the Anglo-Saxon does not thereby acquire a different status under the act from other members of his group. Hence, so once again, they're telling you based off of the classification or group you're claiming to be under, just by having a different so-called skin tone does not place you in a so-called different category, i.e. a different status. All right. So it says, of course, when an individual applying for citizenship have a skin of different color than is usual for the members of the group from which he claims to come, a strong burden of proof then rests upon him to show by the usual methods of proving genealogy that he is in fact a member of that group. Let me pause. So once again, if you claim to be an Englishman, Anglo-Saxon, an Asian, or excuse me, Chinese, Japanese, whatever so-called nation, you must prove through evidence, genealogy, that you are a member of that group. So you can't just make it up. You just can't say this is what I want to be because of my belief system is tying me to this. You have to show some type of paperwork via, like we said, descent. All right, let me continue. After the individual has been traced into his group, the second question which the court must answer is whether the members of the group, in this case, the group you're claiming to be, as the members of that group as a whole are white persons, as Congress understood the term in 1790 when it first enacted the statute.
Heavy. That's heavy, y'all.
So pay attention. So, because the thing is, we're talking about Anglo-Saxons. So what was the status recognized as Anglo-Saxons when so-called the 1790 Naturalization Act was created? Even though some of us may have been placed in the misnomer as Negroes, now I'm finding out that you have Anglo-Saxon descent, what was that status recognized in law? And for you to prove that you place in that status, you have to show your genealogy. Let's continue so that way the king can go to the next point because it's getting good. Um, in deciding this latter question, the test is not how the group in question would be classified by ethnologists who have made a study of racial origins, but rather what groups of peoples then living in 1790 with characteristics then existing were intended by Congress to be classified as white persons.
Ooh, that's heavy. Y'all better, boy. Whoo, that's heavy. Out of mind, out of sight. But when you start seeing the effects of it, which was out of mind, out of sight, you're gonna have a heavy penalty to pay. Continue.
So they're saying. So let me explain that. So in 1790, based off the group you classify yourself as, or they classify or known as white person, based off the characteristics that Congress recognized them with at the time of the 1790 Naturalization Act. All right. It says, applying these principles, the court finds that petitioner is an Arab and that Arabs are not white persons within the meaning of the act. It is recognized that the United
That's
States.
good. That's good. That's
Okay.
good. All right. So he's an Arab. All right. That's his nationality. Arabian. All right. On the continent of Europe. Let's just clarify that. His nationality was Arab on the continent of Asia. All right. Now let's just get another reference before we move forward. All right. Where is it at? Right here. But God versus same thing. Dealing with the same situation, dealing with those being classified under the Naturalization Act of 1790 and the test qualification. All right. Proving that you are a part of that group. Go right here. At the conclusion of the case. Right here. Read this, Archbishop.
It says, but they are grouped together.
1 second. Let's go a little bit more higher. Right here.
Hence, it seems to require a strong mental effort to sweep into a single category. However elastic, so many different peoples, Europeans, North Africans, West Asiatics, Iranians, and others, all the way to the Indo-Gangetic plains and uplands, whose complexion presents every shade of color except yellow. They range from white to the deepest brown or even black. But they are grouped together in a single division because their essential properties are one. Their substantial uniformity speaks to the eye that sees below the surface. We recognize a common racial stamp in the facial expression, the structure of the hair, partly also the bodily proportions, in all of which points they agree more with each other than the other. They agree more with each other than with the other main divisions. Even in the case of certain black or very dark races, such as the Bejas, Somali, and a few other Eastern Hamites, we are reminded instinctively more of Europeans or Berbers than of Negroes, thanks to their more regular features and brighter expression.
All right. So, I mean, what other proof do we here at the Third Timothy English Church have to say? All right. We've been telling you this on previous lectures from the past about this case law, Enway versus Hassan, Begot versus Thing. All right. On regards to proving the first test, genealogy, ethnicity on this land. Here, not over there. You can go there anytime you want to. And I'm pretty sure the way the state of affairs are in, you don't want to go. All right. But that's going to be the case if you can't prove you belong here. That's the question. Can you prove to them, do you belong here? Because right now, the citizens are arguing about those slaves that are coming up here now and don't realize that they're slaves themselves. That question is about to pop. All right. What gives those migrants more rights than those who are already here? The same rights, because you're a migrant. You can't say nothing. All right. Let's get to the proof. All right. Because we're dealing with, the focus is Chief Justice Taney's interpretation on us as Negroes. We understand that that interpretation was based off the status as deemed by the Naturalization Act of 1790, that we were not excluded in the Naturalization Act as citizens. All right. So they let you know, point one, all you people as Negro, blacks, colored Ethiopians, which the case law just said that you're Anglo-Saxon Berbers, because Anglo-Saxons were on the European continent and they were more referred to as Berbers. All right.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to an identity that satisfies the first step. So if that's the case, then being here over here in North America, we have to find out that who were we here in North America that has a status here in North America that is excluded from the Naturalization Act of 1790, because we know that includes the colonists, because the colonists were those who became the United States, which created that congressional legislation, i.e., positive law, which Dred Scott case said don't exist in England. All right. So it's our job to prove that this is indeed England. And Dred Scott said it was England because they had to create law respecting the crown. All
Mm-hmm.
right. All in one case. All in one case. And Frederick Douglass knew it. This is why he had a beef with Chief Justice Taney. You don't believe it? Let's look at the beef. They had a beef, y'all. Check this out. Read right here.
All right, so it says their confrontation came in 1857 in a battle waged with pen and ink. By that year, neither called Baltimore home any longer. Chief Justice Taney wrote from Washington, D.C., where he had settled after the death of his wife. His ideas expressed through U.S. Supreme Court opinions. Douglass called Western New York's Rochester home, living in the heart of a radical reform culture that had also given birth to the first women's rights convention. There he published news and commentary in the pages of the weekly Frederick Douglass paper. The two faced off over the case of Scott v. Stanford and a disagreement about the standing of black Americans before the Constitution. It was an old debate, one that had its origins in the 1820s. Were black Americans citizens of the United States, or were they mere denizens, denizens is foreigners, without any claim to protection under the law? Taney denied black citizenship. His March 1857 opinion concluded that at the time of nation's founding, black Americans had held no rights that white men were bound to respect. Taney reasoned that because they had been excluded from the Constitution's vision of the body politic, black people, whether enslaved or free, were not citizens of the United States in 1857. Douglass took the opposite view, asserting that blackness was no bar to belonging, and in a sense his reasoning was as stark as that of Taney. Douglass viewed his citizenship as self-evident, and he spoke out as a man, an American, a citizen, a colored man of both Anglo-Saxon and African, aka Berber, descent. Taney's ideas were, Douglass pronounced, a perversion of the Constitution and a brazen misstatement of the facts of history. He relied upon the Constitution's plain language, which made no reference to color or the physical peculiarities of any part of the people of the United States. Douglass continued asserting that no secret and unwritten understanding could be imputed to the founders because such men were not of one mind about the status of the enslaved African race or its future in the United States. The debate turned somewhat personal. Douglass mocked Taney as overreaching. Judge Taney could do many things, but he cannot perform impossibilities. He cannot bail out the ocean, annihilate its firm old earth, or pluck the silvery star of liberty from our northern sky. He may decide and decide again. He cannot change the essential nature of things, making evil good and good evil. Happily for the whole human family, their rights have been declared and decided in a court higher than the Supreme Court. Taney felt the sting as he came to understand how his decision was being discredited. He went so far as to privately pen a supplemental Dred Scott opinion and hoped for a chance to re-argue his position. It never came.
Ah, all right. So y'all better look at what Douglass is saying. This man is a prophet. All right. He's telling this man what is that old thing about our ancestors? Follow the North Star. Right? Follow the North Star. This man has a magazine called the North Star.
And the North Star was supposed to follow you to guide you to freedom.
Guide you to freedom. All right. He had a book, From Bondage to Freedom. And he says the same thing. He didn't say he had African descent. He just said he had Anglo-Saxon paternity. Let's see it. This is his book. My Bondage, My Freedom. Read this, Archbishop.
All right. It says,
right here, start how.
On page 58, Life as a Slave. How she acquired this knowledge.
Stop. He's talking about his mom's, because he thought his mother, Harriet Bailey, was illiterate, and come out to find out she was not illiterate, and to make it so bad that out of all the slaves, she was the majority, only one of the ones that were able to read. All right, but he himself had to learn to read. Go ahead.
How she acquired this knowledge, I know not. For Tuckahoe is the last place in the world where she would be apt to find facilities for learning. I can therefore fondly and proudly ascribe to her an earnest love of knowledge. That a field hand should learn to read in any slave state is remarkable, but the achievement of my mother, considering the place, was very extraordinary, and in view of that fact I am quite willing and even happy to attribute any love of letters I possess, and for which I have got, despite of prejudices, only to much credit, not to my admitted Anglo-Saxon paternity.
Stop. So he didn't even mention African, Negro, color in his book. He said Anglo-Saxon paternity. He didn't say maternity. He said paternity. So he understood primogeniture. The understanding the male heir. All right, because he was a kingmaker. The Douglas family were kingmakers, meaning that they upheld the standards of the royal prerogatives of the king by keeping in the line of succession that will one day fall in the hands of a royal bloodline. All right, we're going to show you that today. Read on a little bit more.
All right, so once again it says, only to much credit, not to my admitted Anglo-Saxon paternity, but to the native genius of my sable, unprotected and uncultivated mother, a woman who belonged to a race whose mental endowments it is, at present, fashionable to hold in disparagement and contempt. Some of the way to her account was the impassable gulf of slavery between us during her entire illness. My mother died without leaving me a single intimation of who my father was. There was a whisper that my master was my father, yet it was only a whisper, and I cannot say that I ever gave it credence. That by the laws of slavery, children in all cases are reduced to the condition of their mothers.
You missed it.
All right, forgot that? Okay, hold on. Okay, and I cannot say that I ever gave it credence. Indeed, I now have reason to think he was not. Okay, so let me reread that. So some of the way to her account was the impassable gulf of slavery between us during her entire illness. My mother died without leaving me a single intimation of who my father was. There was a whisper that my master was my father, yet it was only a whisper, and I cannot say that I ever gave it credence. Indeed, I now have reason to think he was not. Nevertheless, the fact remains, in all its glaring odiousness, that by the laws of slavery, children in all cases are reduced to the condition of their mothers. This arrangement admits of the greatest license to brutal slaveholders and their profligates, sons, brothers, relations, and friends, and gives to the pleasure of sin the additional attraction of profit.
That's fine. So as we can see, he understands what was being practiced in North America based off Partus Sequitur Beatrim. And what is Partus Sequitur Beatrim, Archbishop?
Partus Sequitur Beatrim means being underneath the status of the mother, whether she's a slave or not.
All right. Now, that's very important because let's go here. Let's read this real quick. Read this, Archbishop.
The term surname comes from the French word surnom, sur, meaning above or beyond, nom from the Latin nomen, meaning name. Ivan M. Charina
They ain't
Pacheco.
gotta read all that.
Right. The use of surnames the use of surnames is a relatively recent historical practice. In the early life of all races, surnames were unknown, while given names have been used from the most distant times to identify and distinguish a particular individual from his fellows. Smith vs. United. From the beginning to the mid part of the Middle Ages, the term name referred to the given or first name of the individual. The Anglo-Saxon tradition of surnames dates back to the Norman Conquest of 1066. Surnames are said not to have been used in England until the Norman Conquest. The Normans introduced a number of non-English given names such as Richard, Robert, and William, of which William became and remained the single most common recorded name in the 12th century.
Stop right there. Now let's get disqualified what Frederick Douglass just said about here in North America, that they don't practice the paternal ancestry as he agreed or admitted it was Anglo-Saxon. He understood the status of the mother under Part 2, Sequel be of trim. All right? This is going to be qualified right here. In modern day case law. Right here.
It says, an illegitimate boy might be called by his mother's name, but it was equally natural and useful to refer to the son of a highly respected widow in the same way, or even, when the father was alive, but away for years on some distant expedition or married to a dominant wife, the lad might have spoken of as belonging to Moll or Allison or Marjorie. The paternal surname, even if it initially bestowed, did not necessarily survive the father's absence. Many of these English matronymics are still in use. As many as 1/10 of contemporary English surnames of relationship, as contrasted to those derived from names of places or occupations, were originally matronymics. Eventually, the medieval property structure, which invested all marital property in the husband, and the firm and exclusive establishment of primogeniture in the 14th century, resulted in a widespread use of hereditary paternal surnames. Sometime after the early 14th century, surnames began to serve as hereditary family names, partly because the inheritance of property was often contingent upon an heir's retention of the surname associated with that property.
Read that again from Archbishop. Y'all better, man. Isaiah 45 verse 4 says that I gave you a surname, but you know me not. It actually says in the Bible that the Lord gave you a surname, but he know you not.
Because you don't know where that name come from.
You don't know where it come from. That's the same. So you have no inheritance. All right, read that verse again.
It says, sometime after the early 14th century, surnames began to serve as hereditary family names, partly because the inheritance of property was often contingent upon an heir's retention of the surname associated with that property. All right. The custom of patrilineal succession evolved from the medieval property system, in which the husband controlled all marital property. In addition, a married woman in medieval times could not contract or maintain suit in her own name. The male was the legal representative of the family, and as such enjoyed the unilateral right to name his family. The custom of patrilineal succession seems to have been a response to England's medieval social and legal system, which came to vest all rights of ownership and management of marital property in the husband. As one commentator noted, the mechanics of recording entitlement to land prompted the retention of the paternal surname.
Okay, so there you got modern day case law to validate the importance of the surname in regards to whatever inheritance that you claim to have. And the only inheritance that you can claim to have is that of what we call feudal tenure. That's a estate in land, and the only way you can have that is by way of permission. because all land is allolio, and land that's allolio belongs to the king, because all land is crown land, which is intel, and the king personifies the crown by way of being the monarch, by being the corporation soul, which is one natural person. All right? I mean, like, who else talk like this? You know what I'm saying? Who else talk like us? All right. So let's get to this beautiful proof that Frederick Douglass shows, as we showed you, that he had a problem with Jesus obtaining on his assumption on who we are here in North America. All right? Because he knows that based off the Dred Scott case, that slavery was not only brought here by Great Britain, the ones who claimed to be the monarchs of England, but it was incorporated in the colonies by those who they received their authority to colonize this land by way of prescription of easement, acting as a sovereign, because ain't no sovereign that's the juror here until I came upon the scene because of my descendancy as a prominent juror, going back to the family under Godfrey Scottleman Jew, son of spoke the fifth ruler of Jerusalem, and his descendant Edward the First, which is found in statues here in New Jersey, established a statute called the Statutes of Entail, that don't conditional bus, which means that you can't sell land but to an heir. But New Jersey statute has abolished. Why? Because they assume that you're not there. They assume you're not there when Frederick Douglass knew back in 1865 that we are still here. All right, let's get to that, because I know I want to hold my Archbishop up for things he's got to do. Let's see. Where is this at? I mean, this is like remarkable. Everybody, you need to get this article. And this is what they're teaching in school in New York. All right. The miserable slave, the degraded serfs, Frederick Douglass, Anglo-Saxon and Mexican War. We know the Mexican War was a war of dealing with secession of territory that United States annexed. And that territory actually belonged to Spain. All right. Spain and France had that territory, and that territory was ceded to Great Britain, the Kingdom of England. And we know that the Kingdom of England under Great Britain is where those subjects of England became slaves of Great Britain by way of what we call the Scottish kings, who infiltrated England as a result of the War of the Yorks and Lancasters by way of the Lancaster branch dealing with Henry VII and Henry VIII. Henry VII and VIII had alliances with the House of Scottish Kings. Let's prove it right quick. Treaty of Paris. So y'all won't think we're lying. I know y'all saying, how are they able to recall all this? Read this right quick.
The Treaty of Perpetual Peace was signed by James IV of Scotland and Henry VII of England in 1502. It agreed to end. Now pause. Now 1 second. Everyone understand that James IV, as well as Henry VII, these both were Roman Catholics by descent. So regardless of what crown or whatever throne they were sitting, they were Roman Catholics. All right, so it is agreed to end the intermittent warfare between Scotland and England, which had been waged over the previous 200 years. And although it failed in this respect, as hostilities continued intermittently throughout the 16th century, it led to the Union of Crowns 101 years later.
Okay, so what he's reading right here is a secret alliance between Scotland and a cadet branch of the Plantagenet of the House of Lancasters under Henry VIII, because Henry VIII took the role of the king as a result of his claim himself under what they call the Supremacy Act, as a result of the War of the Roses. All right, you know what? Everybody ever heard of the War of Roses? Let's clear that up real quick, because let's go to the Frederick Douglass family. All right, the Frederick Douglass family. Check this out, y'all. Look how smart this man was. Frederick Douglass family. We can go to his family. Read this part right here.
His family would later go on to become a part of the African American upper class, continuing to provide leadership and intermarrying with descendants of the African American educationist and political kingmaker Booker T. Washington.
Okay, so Booker T. Washington was another kingmaker. And a kingmaker is somebody who perpetuates or who assists in perpetuating the leadership by way of intermarrying between the royal family. So he's saying all African Americans are part of the royal family. We have to keep it in succession, but we have to restore our king by making the king out of what we have here. All right? By restoring that primogeniture, that royal family, but don't worry about it, it was already done. But what is Kingmaker? Let's define that before we go to this proof. Read that, Archbishop.
A kingmaker is a person or group that has great influence on a royal or political succession without themselves being a viable candidate.
Read that again. Say that again. Listen to how our preservation of our state is being done. They knew they couldn't come up with this mess back then when they was going through slavery.
Exactly.
They would have shut the door. Nobody Ali know he couldn't come out with what he wanted to tell. He said he had to. He said, "Don't throw away your surname. They're gonna have to pay back in compound interest for what they did to you in slavery."
Exactly.
Right? But he knew enough to be able to deal with the unification until the Messiah come back, which is me. All right, because I was the assistant grand sheik of the Moorish Science Temple of America, but I was smart enough to understand that was just a school of thought, and there are many schools of thought on this plane that existed. All right, so they knew enough to understand what Booker T. Washington knew enough to preserve what was anciently preserved in regards to that one person, that one individual, and they had many times for that one individual to come forth with this information that the people in the times of slavery knew what they needed to do to fix it. And Frederick Douglass was a recorder of deeds. Do you understand what I'm saying? He was the recorder of deeds. And what is the recorder of deeds? Let's go there. Archbishop like that one.
Recorder of deeds. Background: officers with similar duties.
Hold on, no. Start from the top.
Recorder of deeds or deeds registry is a government office tasked with maintaining public records and documents, especially records relating to real estate ownership that provide persons other than the owner of a property with real rights over that property.
Ooh, y'all mind need to be blown up right now. You know what I'm saying? This man said it outright. This is why they wanted to kill him. They wanted to put him back in slavery. Because listen to what he just said. Recorder of the deeds or deed registry and all those who have a property have what he's talking about. You just got an instrument of conveyance of real estate. It has nothing to do with the property.
Yep.
All right. Because if you're dealing with property, that means you must trace that deed back to the chain of title of the original grantor. And we all know the original grantor here at the Third English Church is who, Archbishop?
It's the king.
And who is the king personifies?
It's the crown.
All right, that's what I'm talking about. Crown land. You got to know this. So it says what? The recorder of deeds or deeds registry is a government office tasked with maintaining public records and documents, especially recording related to real estate. So he was sitting in a public office, a slave, sitting at the hands of the public office, maintaining public records, dealing with documents which are called instruments in the eyes of law, recorded relative to what we call real estate and the ownership of real estate, right? So he knows who the owner is. We're going to prove who he knows the owner is. It's the crown. Anglo-Saxons would control the crown. Why? Because he said here, he recorded instruments relating to real estate ownership that provides persons other than the owner of the property with the rights over that property. So he knows what the United States is doing is fraudulent. He knows it, but he got no choice. He has no choice but to do what's being done, hoping that one day somebody's going to pick it up and put together what he put in place. All right? Rights over property. Rights over property deals with the owner. So let's see who the owner is, because he's going to tell you himself. He's going to tell you himself. Y'all going to love the Third English Church for this, y'all. And this is being taught in high school in New York by a high school teacher who studied education. All right. He uses Frederick Douglass essays to teach high school. And y'all don't even want to learn this. All right. They probably got two Anglo-Saxon students in the class, and the rest of them are those who are descendants of those who are controlling our state as a result of us not doing what Frederick Douglass is about to tell you you have to do. All right? And we're going to get to the nook and cranny of it. Where is it at? Right here. The Miserable Slaves, the Degraded Search, Frederick Douglass, Anglo-Saxon and Mexican War. Now, we know the Mexican War deals with succession of territory to expand territory, and this was Frederick Douglass had a problem with. He knew why they wanted the territorial for the expression of to expansion of slavery. So that becomes a question of who owns the land to expand slavery, because he knew the land belongs to us as subjects of the crown. All right, that's why he went to Britain, England, to get this mess straight, to broaden his understanding about this, to be able to put it in writing. He couldn't come back and enforce it because of the times he was in, but he put it and preserved it in writing, and we're reading it right now. All right, so let's get to this, and I ain't gonna even interrupt. It's so good. Y'all can get this article. Anna Abrams, New York University, New York, the United States. Read this abstract right quick.
It says, this essay examines Frederick Douglass' use of the term Anglo-Saxon in the context of both American slavery and Anglo-American relations. Douglass's critical perspective on the national narrative about Anglo-Saxonism during the Mexican War allowed him to identify loopholes by which he and other black writers could enter the mainstream American timeline of progress. Pay attention. The romantic Anglo-Saxonism in vogue at the time was already shadowy and open to individual interpretation. Douglass isolated two features of Anglo-Saxonism in this period that were advantageous for his anti-colonizationist agenda.
You hear that? Anti-colonization. You hear this, y'all? Anti-colonization. Because we know what decolonization means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ain't anti-colonization decolonization?
Yep, it's against colonizing. Yep.
It's against colonizing. All right, go ahead.
In this period that were advantageous for his anti-colonizationalist agenda, literacy, a crucial part of the ideology's imperialism, and the temporality of linear progress. This essay contends that he sought to remove these legacies from exclusively white control.
All right, and we're going to go straight to the meat. You can read this article on your own, but I'm going to go straight to the meat because you know they always say the best for last. You know what I'm saying? It don't get sweet till you get to the juices that settle down at the bottom. You know what I'm saying? So all those who don't read this article, you ain't gonna really fully digest what this prophet is trying to tell you for the redemption of the day. Because we ain't in the situation he was in back in the time of slavery. Mm-hmm. All right? We got all this proof right before you, and we know why Thomas Jefferson presented to the Virginia Assembly in regards to separations of church and state, because he knew that all the property, i.e. land, belongs to the church. Under the statutes of mortmain, a dead pledge. Article of Confederation, Article 6 says the United States pledged all their property based off the debt that they owe to who? The subjects of England, right? Because you ain't been paid back. You can't be paid back if you consider property, i.e. chattel property, which Frederick Douglass knew. Why? Let's get there. All right? And we're going to close out on that.
And the point, once again, they're telling you for you to come out of this mindset of being colonized, you have to be literate. Like I said, right now, you notice a lot of the people today, they're anti-literacy. They don't want to learn anything. They rather shun the truth and go along with their delusions. So therefore, they feel that they continue to keep using that as your go-to card because you are considered one of the so-called freest countries in the world. And yet you know no truth regarding, like I said, who you are to heal your mind. So therefore, you can restore law and order back on the territory which we call heaven on earth.
Yes. And Frederick Douglass is about to tell you. He's going to tell a story of Anglo-Saxon America. Let's hear from him. That's how he titled it. I mean, I couldn't believe what I was reading. All right. We blow it up a little bit more so y'all can see it. Y'all better share this article.
And in fact, it's called Post-Medieval, A Journey of Medieval Cultural Studies.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get there, Archbishop.
All right, so Douglass retells the story of Anglo-Saxons in America. Douglass' trip to Britain left him with the impression that America was a web of narratives, constantly being retold. In his farewell to the British people, Douglass said, "The fact is, the whole system, the entire network of America, entirety of the American society is one great falsehood from beginning to end."
Did y'all hear that?
It is. This is from this is from Frederick Douglass' mouth. He's telling you that the whole American society is one great falsehood from the beginning to the end. Later in the same speech, he said, "We are a nation of inconsistencies." Completely made up of inconsistencies. Pause. This is what he's talking about. Technically, the mindset that everyone out here is pretty much living. Everyone got their own so-called perspective on life
Get
and
him,
how
Marsh Bishop.
society,
Get him.
and yet it's all falsehood. The way you're thinking is all false, and therefore that's the reason why you cannot stand the test of time regarding, like I said, your livelihood is because of your thinking is wrong. Let's continue. So he said, "We are a nation of inconsistencies, completely made up of inconsistencies." Given Douglas' sense of America as a composite of stories, it is unsurprising that upon his return to the United States, imbued with a new sense of agency, he would become one of the nation's most famous and controversial storytellers as editor of the North Star. He dedicated himself to addressing the nation's inconsistencies. In the third issue of the paper, Douglas published an article titled "The War with Mexico," in which he explained his anti-war stance. This is the first time Douglas mentioned Anglo-Saxons in the paper, and he did so 4 times over the space of a column and a half. First, he wrote, "Mexico seems a doomed victim to Anglo-Saxon cupidity, a love of dominion." So by the second mention in which Anglo-Saxon blood, he mocked Anglo-Saxonism explicitly when he wrote, "The main argument in favor of the war was the meanness and wickedness of the Mexican people, that the cup of Mexican iniquity was full, and that God was now making use of the Anglo-Saxon race as a rod to chastise them." Douglas, 1848a. By this point in the article, Douglas had clearly established that the war is one between Saxons and Mexicans. In his final mention of Saxons, he flipped let me see where I mentioned. So he flipped Anglo-Saxonism on its head when he wrote that the Mexican people have been reduced to a condition little better than that endured by the when Saxons when vanquished by their Norman invaders. "But so sure as there is a God of justice, we shall not go unpunished. The penalty is certain. We cannot escape. A terrible retribution awaits us." For Douglas, the violence of Anglo-Saxonism was hypocritical because its adherents ignored the pain of their own past victimization. Though Douglas distances himself from Saxons in the rest of the article, he was bound up in the retribution that awaits us, not them. This is the first in a series of instances which Douglas binds himself up with the temporality of the Anglo-Saxons, and in doing so exploits Anglo-Saxonism to suit his goal of inspiring an end to the war. Throughout the article, Douglas continually clarified and sharpened the definition of Anglo-Saxon, and in his last mention, the hypocrisy of Americans' current usage crystallizes. Because of the discrepancy between the facts of the English history and the American exceptionalism upon which Anglo-Saxonism was purportedly built, Douglas had difficulty parsing his sense of Americans' temporality and his own personal timeline from the Anglo-Saxonism that drove the war. He wrote in Expatriation, published in the North Star December 22, 1848, that the haughty Norman once looked down upon the degraded and subjected Anglo-Saxon as an inferior species of the race of man. The Americans now look down upon the Mexicans as an inferior species of the race of man, and so we suppose it will ever be with successful tyrants. Douglas manipulated convention and asked his readers to reconsider what Anglo-Saxon history really taught America about assumptions of racial superiority. His level of remove from the Americans mentioned here makes it seem as though Douglas understood himself as an observer and not a participant in the nation's propagandistic manipulations of history.
Stop. Okay. So you see how Frederick Douglass is just a viewer of it. He's saying I'm not a participant of what took place at this time, but I need to go back in time based off memory because information is informing you of the memory where the of a time where you can't go because the body can't move through space and time. The mind can move through space and time. All right, we know time continues to go to the past, present, and future. We know the past is based off memory that you do based off remembering. All right. So that's what he had to do. He had to go back and remember a time, which we call time immemorial, time out of mind. All right. To be able to bring that understanding from time immemorial, time out of mind, to now by bringing the conclusion for what's preserved from time out of mind till the present. All right.
Exactly.
Just like we did. Hell, we didn't know what that Frederick Douglass was Anglo-Saxon. We just found this out a couple of days ago.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And we found this off not because us teaching learned about Frederick Douglass, but on our own observation. And we wasn't even enslaved. You ain't even enslaved. But you ain't taking the time to do the research like we did under the status as free people to even free ourselves even more. Based off what he's saying in regards to the land, because who he was the recorder of deeds.
Yep.
He gave all the land away to somebody who don't own it. But under the skies, he was a kingmaker. He knew that somebody was going to come along and sit in a position to be able to return the state back to the original owner, if you understand the concept of what an owner is. An owner is somebody who is not used some property, but actually owns it. And the owner is the original grantor. All right, let's continue to read.
It says, and yet Douglass understood himself as a participant in their future. At the war's end, Douglass wrote an editorial for the North Star that began by distinguishing his paper from the others celebrating peace. He wrote in peace, peace, peace. We are such an exception to the great mass of our fellow countrymen that we find it difficult to unite with them at this time in their general exaltation. The pronoun here is clear. We are an exception apart from the great mass. And yet, by the end of his statement, Douglass puts himself back in the company of the war's perpetrators by entreating his readers to crave pardon for our crimes at the hands of a God whose mercy endureth forever. The we apart at the beginning of the piece becomes part of the national hour by the end of it. Douglass was consistent in expressing that his destiny was contingent on American Anglo-Saxonism, even while he refused to participate in the ideology's manipulations of history. So from there, he's recognizing himself as being Anglo-Saxon, but separating himself from the manipulations that those who are claiming themselves to be Anglo-Saxon have done regarding the information of the Anglo-Saxon people.
Let's stop right there, Archbishop. Let's give him an example. All right. Let's show him who we talking about. So he know who we talking about. He know who he talking about, and we know who he talking about. You want to take a guess, Archbishop?
The WASP.
Yes, sir. See, boy, we sharp. We sharp.
Yep. He knew it was going to be people who was going to take our identities or people who are using our identities who weren't, and we was going to get the blame for it. But we still have to be and accept who we are, and we have to fix the narrative, which we're doing here at the Third Temple English Church of England.
Let's inform them who this group is that Frederick Douglass is talking about.
In the United States, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, or WASP, is a sociological term which often used to describe white Protestant Americans who are generally part of the white dominant culture or upper class, and historically often the mainline Protestant elite. Historically or most consistently, WASPs are of British descent. Pay attention, British descent. Though the definition of WASP varies in this respect. WASPs have dominated American society, culture, and politics for most of the history of the United States. Critics have disparaged them as the establishment, although the social influence of wealthy WASPs has declined since the 1960s. The group continues to play a central role in American finance, politics, and philanthropy.
All right. So we see that the Protestants goes back to those Anglicans who are part of what we call the Church of England. And that goes back into Virginia colonies, which was separated by Thomas Jefferson petition to the Virginia Assembly to separate church and state. All right, because they didn't want to follow church rules. They didn't want to follow church rules. Let's go back to the Dred Scott case. Frederick Douglass. What was that at?
I think it was the miserable slaves.
Right here.
All right. So it says, this we depart at the beginning of the piece becomes part of the national hour by the end of it. Douglas was consistent in expressing that his destiny was contingent on American Anglo-Saxonism, even while he refused to participate in ideology's manipulations of history. As he wrote in The Destiny of Colored Americans, an article published in the North Star November 16, 1849, we deem it a settled point that the destiny of the colored man is bound up with that of the white people of this country. Wow.
Did y'all hear what he just read? This is from the mouth of Frederick Douglass.
Let me read it. He said, we deem it a settled point that the destiny of the colored man is bound up with that of the white people of this country, be the destiny of the latter what it may. Douglas capitalized on Anglo-Saxonism to show that the true heirs to the Saxon legacy, pay attention, that the true heirs to the Saxon legacy,
gonna smile. I know you
as a conquered people were not only Mexican, as in examples above, but also black. In Douglas' view, blacks had even more of a claim on Anglo-Saxon cultural inheritance than Mexicans did, given their common enslavement. For Douglas, black Americans can understand Anglo-Saxon England as a point of origin. Pay attention.
Did y'all hear that, boy?
Pay
At
attention.
The point of origin. This is a free slave, y'all. Know what I'm saying? And look where he got at the time he existed. And if we apply what he applied at the time of existence, imagine where we could go.
Exactly.
We already got it already lined up for you. We incorporated, we got the laws in place, we got the form for you and everything. All we need is you.
I mean, who else are you gonna find to know this history and speaks it so elegantly and well with full conviction than us? I've yet to meet anyone else besides those who are part of the church who can actually stand on this foundation. You know, and like once again, like the king said, you all pretty much got the blood. It's just based off of you accepting who you are and pledging your allegiance back to your sovereign. And we do have a king. We always have a king. And we always will have a king.
Frederick Douglass told you. He was dealing with the Kingmaker. The king is made. He's here.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? He's here. What we're reading you is lectures he did in Ireland and Britain. All right, it said it at the top of this PDF that he was talking this informant in Ireland and Britain.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and if it was effective there, you know it's effective here, because if it's not effective, that means that they're still practicing slavery.
They're still practicing slavery.
I'm trying to tell you, you better be talking what Frederick Douglass was talking about. All right, continuing our closing.
All right, so let me read. So it says, for Douglas, black Americans could understand Anglo-Saxon England as a point of origin by invoking medieval English history. That's why we keep telling y'all, medieval history is our history. Mm-hmm. And challenging white members of his audience to think of themselves as oppressive Normans rather than Anglo-Saxons.
Ooh! Did y'all hear that? This is 1865. 1845. This man is talking trash.
Talking
in front
trash.
Of all these people. He telling her. He said, what did he say? He said,
y'all got to think yourselves. Y'all the Normans,
said,
not the Anglo-Saxons.
You got to think of yourselves as Normans who invaded our land.
Invaded us, exactly.
Come on, man.
Y'all invaded us.
Beautiful.
And in this case, and we know the Normans weren't them, but just in the sake of the argument, we're saying what they did to us.
Yeah, man. He gonna tell you. Read off.
Douglas participated in vaunting historical Saxons while he called for an end to the Anglo-Saxonist sense of racial superiority. In this model, the Anglo-Saxon legacy of freedom could be more widely accessible. In America's England, Christopher Hanlon writes, tapping the transatlantic genealogies that has circulated through this national culture since at least 1850. Douglas assumes his white northeastern audience to regard themselves as the descendants of those Saxon serfs, and plumbs that
Ooh,
habit of identification for its further implications.
man,
Pause. So he's telling his so-called white audience that you are actually the so-called serfs, i.e., you were the slaves of the
this
Saxons.
play. Yes, sir. He was talking trash back there, y'all. This man got out of slavery and switched it on them.
And twisted him because he found himself.
You know what I'm
He
saying?
found himself and he was able to back it up.
Yup. Check it out. I'm telling you, man, we heavy here. We some heavy swingers here at the Third Tier English Church. We're inviting all people of any platform, of any forum to come on. We invite you on that platform so we can talk about this. Let's get there together. We are all family. You know what I'm saying? If you don't want to be with us, then we are not family. You can wear the
Absolutely.
surname, you can talk the surname, you can like the surname, but if you ain't wrecking the surname, you got a problem. All right?
All right, so
Archbishop, go ahead.
it says these transatlantic genealogies date back further than 1850. Locating their origins at the time ignores the influence of the Mexican War, which fueled Douglas' interest in exploiting them. Y'all hear this? Reports from the North Star on two different speeches given by Douglas, one under the title of New England Anti-Slavery Convention on June 16, 1848, and another under the title Frederick Douglass Lecture from January 26, 1849, include references to his slave-ass Saxon metaphors. During the first speech, the audience was reminded that once the Anglo-Saxon race in England was subject to Norman conquerors, though they now claimed superiority to all others and the right to plunder and enslave them.
Mm.
During the second occasion, when he reminded his Anglo-Saxon hearers that the proud Norman once trod upon the necks of their ancestors, the Saxon slave, it was clear that the mental power of a fugitive slave held sway over several hundred half-emancipated American Republicans. According to these reports, Douglas maintained sympathy with medieval Saxons while asking 19th century American Saxons to reconsider the implications of their identification with the ancient race.
Mm. Whoo! Did y'all hear that? He said, y'all don't even try to identify with these ancient race.
Because it's not you.
You're not them. You know what I'm saying? You're not them. Man, that's gotta make somebody smile. Somebody gotta leave a comment. Somebody gotta say something to the justification, not just to because the Dred Scott case clearly says in the Dred Scott case that outside of color, when you look at the terms of slavery, it was the white people who was enslaved in the dark ages around the world.
Exactly.
Chief Cheney knew that. He knew that. The founding fathers knew that. The colonists knew that. The Scottish monarchs knew that. It's just us that don't know that. It's just you that don't know that. All right? Continue, Archbishop.
While other abolitionists explicitly questioned the validity of the Anglo-Saxon origin myth in an effort to condemn the sense of inevitable racial domination that was tangled up in war rhetoric, Douglas pointed out that the American slaves were more like ancient Saxons than were their white masters. Douglas' attention to Anglo-Saxonism enabled him to make a case, rare and artful, even among abolitionists.
You hear this? Did you hear this? This man was convincing them based off what we talking about back then.
Back then.
You know what I'm saying? This man was around the world. Now imagine we in the court of law trying to implement a case on slavery on behalf of us as a nation. That ain't including everybody.
Exactly.
It's us. You know what I'm saying? I'm sorry. You know, there's too many people migrating here wanting the rights that the colonists wanted as the English had here prior to them coming here and migrating here. We was already here. Continue, Archbishop.
Yep. So it says Douglas' attention to Anglo-Saxonism enabled him to make a case rare and artful even among abolitionists for the accessible nature of slave owners' power over the enslaved. On February 16, 1849, the North Star republished an article called Ethnology, written by white Northern abolitionist James Russell Lowell and originally published in Child's Anti-Slavery Standard. Lowell wrote, "Nations like individuals, when they have risen in the social scale, go immediately to the herald's office for a coat of arms and a pedigree."
Woo! Ooh, that's gotta sound good, boy. We've been talking about these coats of arms.
Coats of
We've been
arms, yep.
talking about these pedigrees,
And you can't
right?
make nothing new. You can only be what you come from.
Exactly. It's common. Okay.
We are obliged to content ourselves with vague assertions of our Anglo-Saxon descent, the truth being that the settlers of New England and of those very few can lay any probable claim to such an origin.
Ooh! Did y'all hear this? The words that's coming out of this prophet's mouth. You know what I'm saying? This prophet's mouth, he said, nobody can make claim to this ancient history going back to time immemorial. This is our concept of time immemorial. They talk about us.
Yeah.
Okay, Archbishop.
In Lowell's view, white Americans took ownership of Anglo-Saxon history in an attempt to legitimate their current situation. What can you say right there, people?
Jaw dropping.
What can you say right there? He's literally telling you that us Anglo-Saxon Berbers, history was usurped. It was stolen from us, and new people started identify as it. Even though they were trying to identify as it, they couldn't identify as the ancient history because it wasn't them.
It wasn't them. Yes, sir.
So they were doing something new to people who they knew nothing about, the original people whose ideology, or excuse me, identity they took. Because like he said, the Normans conquered us, the Anglo-Saxons. And now you have these new so-called American Saxons doing exactly what the Normans did to us.
Exactly.
Because if they knew who we were, they wouldn't have went over the world to do what the Normans did to us, to other people.
Yes, yes. Because you had the Norman conquest in England, and then you had the Norman conquest in Europe, called the East and West Schism in 1054. You know what I'm saying? So this was a global event. That's why the English Maritime Reform was a global event. It was a continental. You know what I'm saying? All that Christianity and the laws govern Christianity, because slavery in Maryland is governed by the Bible.
By the Bible.
That's another story. But let's come into our closing. We don't.
All right, so it says Douglas was less interested in truths that disprove myths about American whiteness than in using the history of non-race based oppression to support the idea that the white and black races were more similar than commonly believed among Anglo-Saxonists.
Yes, he ain't trying to hear that. Y'all, we ain't the same.
No, we ain't the same. Nope. In his 1st of August address at Canandaigua, 1847, he said, "Who were the fathers of our present haughty oppressors in this land? They were, until within the last 4 centuries, the miserable They were until the last 4 centuries the miserable slaves, I apologize laughing, the degraded serfs of Norman nobles. They were subjected to every species of brutality which their fiendish oppressors could invent. They were regarded as an inferior race, unfit to be trusted with their own rights. They were not even allowed to walk on the public highway and travel from town without written permission from their owners. They could not hold any property whatever, but were themselves property, bought and sold. They were not.
What did Dred Scott say? When you go back to the dark ages of the world, it was them who were
enslaved.
You know what I'm saying? Chief Justice knew that. That's why Frederick was so teed off with him. And now we're reading it right here. Continue.
It says, they were not permitted to give testimony in courts of law. They were punished for crimes, of which, if committed by their haughty masters, were not deemed worthy of punishment at all. They were not allowed to marry without the consent of their owners. They were subjected to the lash and might even be murdered with impunity by their cruel masters."
It's coming to our closing.
Importantly, in the same speech, Douglas theorized about the importance of making anniversaries, appropriately given the occasion of the speech, the emancipation of the British West Indies. He said, "The sentiment that leads us to celebrate noble deeds, to mark and commemorate great events in the world's progress, is natural and universal. It is the power which makes the present generation the proprietors of the wisdom and experience of bygone ages. It makes the good of the past the property of the present. By figuring history in this way, Douglas made Anglo-Saxon history his property. It belonged to him just as much as anyone else, contra Lowell's perception of Anglo-Saxonism and Smith's Elysian over the facts of Anglo-Saxon history. And yet, while Douglas claimed ownership of this history, he still ended this portion of his speech by alluding to the profitable comparison that might be drawn between historical Anglo-Saxon and black American slaves. To say that these enslaved populations are comparable is to posit the latter as similar to the former, not only in terms of oppression, but also in terms of progress and chronology.
Damn well. So let's close this with one more verse and we'll be done.
Conclusion. Ultimately, Douglas' eye for chinks in the national story about Anglo-Saxons during the Mexican War allowed him to spot loopholes by which he and other black writers could enter the mainstream American timeline of progress. You hear that? As I previously discussed, the romantic Anglo-Saxonism in vogue was already shadowy and open to individual interpretation. Douglas acknowledged the advantages of two features of Anglo-Saxonism in this period key for anti-colonizationalist: literacy, a crucial part of the ideology's imperialism, and the temporality of linear progress, while removing those legacies from exclusively white control. Invoking the past was one way to show the potential blacks held in moving from slave to free temporality.
All right. So as you can see, brothers and sisters, we have but the utmost best interest for all our subjects here in the Kingdom of England. We have did the study, we have did the research, we have put in the claims, we have put in the argument, all right? But you have to come and receive what was destined to be yours, as so eloquently put by one who should not have been able to eloquently put things in regards to the status that he was in. But he was able to overcome that state of existence and move forward to a better day, even in that day, to make sure that equality will manifest and not war as it has been through time immemorial. So with great power comes great responsibility. We know power is illusion is the hand of a fool. So with that, I'm gonna leave all last remarks in the hands of Archbishop Belmont, and I thank him for his lustrous narrative as well as his moderation and moderating on the platform. And we hope that all you, at the sound of our voices, diligently seek this truth that was so eloquently preserved by no other than that prophet, Marcus Partners of Frederick Douglass. All right, and with that, I digress.
There you have it, brothers and sisters, within the Kingdom of England, Empire of Albion, as the King have beautifully have done regarding setting up this lecture to present to those of you who need to know this information regarding who was the true Anglo-Saxons during this period in time and age, which our people need to know who they truly are, so therefore they can inherit which they have been set to the side for them for far so long. As of what we read from the speech from Prophet Frederick Douglass, because he is a prophet, prophet is messenger, and he did leave this message for us. So we're going to recognize him as that, as well as one of our saints and martyrs within the Third Temple English Church of England, because what he have done was be able to pave the way for us to be able to also help resurrect ourselves along the paths of salvation, just like the other saints and martyrs who have come and paved the way for us. And as you can see what he did go over there to Britain. He was able to speak to those who were so-called in power and be able to elegantly speak to them regarding our plight that was taking place over here as us being misnomered as so-called black Americans, even though he knew the truth of us being the true Anglo-Saxons whose identity was usurped by those who knew nothing of us, but yet they wanted all of the rights and powers of ours. And now, since things are hectic and no one is claiming themselves to be English, then it's have all been set and left for those who are ready to accept not only the responsibilities, but also have to accept that what happened, good and bad, within our history. The good thing about it now, for us having the power in our hand, like the King says, it comes not only with great responsibility and accountability, but now gives us the ability to actually put this place or this earthly plane back in order. So therefore, we can see ourselves living in perpetual peace as long as our creators have endowed for us here on this earthly plane. So for those of you who just now get an opportunity to hear our voice, we recommend you to check out the Third Temple English Church website to go ahead and get further um, information regarding the lessons that we have been presented, as well as the literature that we have been able to research to be able to bring us up to this conclusion regarding who he is in this day and time. And just like the
Okay.
Supreme Court
Tell them
cases
about the
have
book as
showed,
well.
go ahead, King.
Tell them about the book as well.
Okay. Oh, yes. And we will also have the book that the King has been able to
Be fine.
prepare
Be sure.
um, that we are going to have available for donation because once again, this work it does take time, and we know that for everything to be given over to us, it's not going to be overnight. That's the reason why we need the people themselves to recognize that this is your inheritance, and part of your inheritance is you have to upkeep and keep the church moving, keep the church alive. If you don't keep the church alive, then this information will not be able to continue to be disseminated across the four corners of the world. So once again, we understand that many of you are still caught up into the rat race of the commercial world, and that's understood. But part of that rat race was all part of the game that you were placed in to pull yourself out of that, so therefore you can find yourself be able to come back into the world of peace, which is the kingdom of heaven. And with that being said, I digress and I leave the rest of it to King Clifford Jefferson.
Was that Archbishop Bound from the House of Belmont? Like he so eloquently said, we have a little pamphlet. It's a nice little 44-page book, and it's really a syllabus of who we are, who we are as a people, our origin, from an abstract to a concrete standpoint, dealing with evidence that's not presumptive. You know what I'm saying? So we have it on deck for you. It will be $20 for all those who want it. We'll be having as of right now, it's soft cover. We're moving forward to a hard cover, but like you said, for a nation, it takes finance to uplift a nation, and that we lack. So all those who are able, who are able to contribute to the funding of the Third Timothy English Church, our website, as well as you can reach me out at $ Clifford Jefferson L. We rather you send it to the website because that's the forum created for such a donation or a gift. All right. And we ask that you do, as Archbishop said, go to the website, build the content, build the literature, build the laws, build a charter, build our incorporation, build the information that we have, public notices that we have to those out there in regards of our flight upon a destination that's not uncertain nor unknown. But we know that there is one. So with that, we love you here at the Third Timothy English Church. We greet you in lieu of all our martyrs and all our saints. And we honor Frederick Douglass, for he was the gatekeeper in lieu of the comprehension of how the return of our estate would be. And that's returned back to the understanding of how the Kingmaker is created. And that's through the investment of your pledges and your allegiance to the king as he preserves Parliament. And the Parliament is the laws that govern the land. That's intel left for you. All right, which is yet to take place if you don't come home. So with that, we love you. Hope you love the content. And once again, please leave your remarks.
Like,
Okay.
share, comment,
Subscribe. Right.
subscribe. Make sure, like I said, you talk about these videos. This is the only way to get this information through the algorithm. Especially right now, we keep reiterating to the public that we are in a state of emergency. Like I said, the fact that it's not many of us, we are still considered an endangered species because of there's only a few of us. No matter what the so-called census record says, that how many so-called English people over here, that's not the case because why? They have yet to pledge their allegiance back to our de jure king as well as the de jure English church. And based off of the speech that we had just showed you via Prophet Frederick Douglass, that you have those who are claiming to be you who aren't you. And until you actually truly accept who you are and do what your customary laws have been set down in time and memorial for you to be able to utilize, you will continue to be in the state of subject to as chattel property of the state.
Well said, Archbishop. And with that, peace.
Peace.
All right.
Hold on